In almost all cases, an individual carrying out an act of targeted violence had moved along a discernible pathway, moving from some kind of grievance that triggers thoughts of violence, what we call ideation, through research and planning to preparation and ultimately implementation of the targeted violent act. While individuals can move slowly or rapidly along this pathway, and externalities may accelerate or decelerate their process along it, in most cases this pathway is very definitely there. The challenge for threat assessment teams and the wider school community is spotting people early enough on this pathway to enable timely intervention. Let's look at the steps in turn. Grievance. A grievance is generally defined as the cause of someone's distress or reason for complaint or resentment. Most people will experience grievances through life, and the vast majority do not engage in acts of violence. However, for those who do engage in targeted violence, grievances are common precursors. In the threat assessment context, a grievance takes on additional meaning to include a highly personal meaning for the individual of concern, often fueling a feeling of being wronged and translating into behaviors related to destiny, loss, despair, a sense of mission, including achieving notoriety, or the desire for revenge. Grievances are often understood as being one or a combination of the following: personal, political, religious, racial, ethnic, environmental, special interest. Ideation. The ideation step occurs where an individual is thinking about or expressing the use of violence to address the grievance. Of course, most of us have grievances from time to time, but few of us seriously consider violence in addressing those grievances. When people begin to consider violence as the preferred or only way to address grievances, that is a significant concern. Planning. This step involves the person considering what would be needed to act on the ideas about violence, and frequently involves online searches, researching and gathering information on prior acts of violence in schools, such as school shootings, and in some cases, highly elaborate surveillance and reconnaissance of target areas, the production of maps, schedules, and analysis of weak points in security measures. Preparation. This is the operationalization of the plan. It involves developing or acquiring the skills and means to carry out the plan, such as getting hold of a weapon and practicing. Often this may include preparations around the refinement of the method, creating or acquiring the opportunity to attack, and gaining access to targets. Implementation. The final step is the act of targeted violence itself. It is at this point that the individual initiates the operationalized plan. This occurs once they reach a point where they perceive themselves as capable of doing so. Capability is based on the individual's perceived skill to cause harm and the will to do so. As an individual moves along the pathway to the right and more of the steps are present, capability and risk for violence increases along the vertical dimension. The horizontal line at the bottom of the pathway model represents time. As the individual moves to the right along the pathway, there is often an escalation in the rate of movement, a flurry of activity or energy burst, or changes in the frequency of behaviors causing concern, or a sudden change in their patterns of behavior.
The steps along this path indicate opportunities to observe, identify, and intervene with behaviors or communications that cause concern for violence. Frequently, information about an individual's ideas, plans, and preparations for violence can be observed before violence can occur. However, information is likely to be scattered and fragmented. For example, a teacher may see a certain set of behaviors of an individual in their class. A coach observes other behaviors or expressed thoughts by the individual. A school resource officer has other concerns, and a school administrator is aware of certain conduct violations. The challenge and the key is to act quickly upon initial reports of concern, gather other pieces of the puzzle, and assemble them to determine what picture emerges. When we conduct a threat assessment, essentially we are trying to figure out if the student in question is on this pathway to violence. If so, how far along are they, and how can we get them off the pathway? We will be returning to this graphic throughout our discussions today.